What if I told you that in the final days of World War II, American GI and German Wehrmacht soldiers fought side by side to rescue French politicians from the SS? Imagine this former enemies joining forces in a medieval castle, with American tanks rolling alongside German troops, all to save prisoners who included future French presidents and prime ministers. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy. This actually happened on May 5, 1945, at Castle Itter in Austria. The Battle of Castle Itter is officially recognized as the only battle in World War II where American and German forces fought as allies against a common enemy. It involved one Sherman tank, a handful of American paratroopers, renegade German soldiers, and some of the most important political prisoners of the war. If you think you know everything about World War II, this story will completely blow your mind. So make sure you watch until the very end because the details are absolutely incredible. Welcome back to our historical investigations. Today we're exploring what historians call the strangest battle of World War II, the Battle of Castle Itter on May 5, 1945, where American and German forces became unlikely allies in the war's final days. In this video, we'll uncover how a medieval Austrian castle became a high-security prison for French VIP, how the collapse of Nazi Germany created an impossible situation that forced enemies to become allies, and how a single Sherman tank named Besotten Jenny became the star of one of the most unusual military operations in history. We'll examine the incredible cast of characters involved, from American paratroopers to German officers to French resistance heroes. Most remarkably, we'll see how this battle epitomizes the chaos and moral complexity of World War II's end, when traditional enemies had to choose between old loyalties and immediate survival. The events at Castle Itter reveal how quickly political alliances can shift when faced with a common threat that transcends previous conflicts. To understand how this impossible alliance came about, we need to go back to 1943 and understand what Castle Itter represented in the Nazi prison system. This wasn't just any concentration camp. It was a specialized facility designed to hold the most valuable political prisoners of occupied Europe. Castle Itter sits dramatically on a hilltop in the Austrian Alps, about 100 kilometers east of Innsbruck. Built in the 13th century, it had been converted by the Nazis into a high-security prison specifically for prominent French political figures. The SS designated it as a subcamp of Dachau, but its purpose was entirely different from typical concentration camps. The prisoners held at Castle Itter read like a who's who of French politics. Édouard Daladier, the former prime minister who had signed the Munich Agreement with Hitler in 1938, was imprisoned there. Paul Reynaud, who had been prime minister when France fell in 1940, was also held captive. These weren't just symbolic prisoners, they were potential bargaining chips for post-war negotiations. Also imprisoned were Marie-Agnes Callao, Charles de Gaulle's sister, and several French generals who had refused to collaborate with the Vichy regime. The castle held trade union leaders, resistance fighters, and even some German political prisoners who had opposed the Nazi regime. The conditions at Castle Itter were relatively comfortable compared to other Nazi facilities, but this was strategic rather than humanitarian. The SS wanted these prisoners alive and healthy because they might prove valuable for negotiations as the war turned against Germany. The prisoners had access to books, could receive some mail, and weren't subjected to the systematic brutality of other camps. By early 1945, the situation was becoming desperate for the Nazis. Soviet forces were closing in from the east, Allied forces were advancing from the west, and the Third Reich was collapsing. SS Oberfuhrer Sebastian Wimmer, who commanded the castle, found himself in an impossible position as his superiors abandoned their posts and communications broke down. The turning point came on May 3, 1945, when Wimmer simply abandoned the castle, leaving behind a skeleton crew of guards and the high-value prisoners. This created a power vacuum that would lead to one of the most unusual alliances in military history. This is where our story becomes truly extraordinary. With Nazi authority collapsing, the prisoners at Castle Itter faced a terrifying prospect. The approaching SS units weren't coming to evacuate them, but to execute them to prevent their liberation by Allied forces. The castle's administrator, Sebastian Wimmer, had fled, but before leaving, he had released the prisoners from their cells and told them they were free to go. However, free to go meant walking through hundreds of miles of hostile territory, crawling with desperate SS troops, Gestapo agents, and Nazi fanatics who would kill them on sight. The prisoners faced an impossible choice: stay at the castle and risk execution by SS units, or venture into the countryside and face almost certain death. It was at this moment that one of the most unlikely alliances in military history began to form. The catalyst was Zvonimir Kokovic, a Yugoslav handyman who worked at the castle. On May 3rd, he volunteered to bicycle 30 miles through enemy territory to contact advancing American forces. This wasn't just brave, it was nearly suicidal, as SS patrols were executing anyone found moving without authorization. Meanwhile, something equally remarkable was happening with the German forces in the area. Major Joseph Gangl of the Wehrmacht, who commanded local troops, was facing his own impossible situation. A decorated officer who had served throughout the war, Gangl realized that continuing to follow SS orders meant participating in war crimes that would likely result in his execution by Allied forces. Gangl made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. He decided to protect the prisoners at Castle Itter, even if it meant fighting against fellow Germans. This wasn't just military pragmatism. Contemporary accounts suggest that Gangl had become horrified by SS brutality and saw protecting the prisoners as a way to redeem himself. When Kokovic reached American lines, he encountered elements of the 12th Armored Division under the command of Captain John C. Lee. Lee was a tank commander whose unit had been advancing through Austria, encountering scattered German resistance and the chaos of a collapsing military organization. Lee's initial reaction was skepticism. The story of a medieval castle full of French VIP defended by German soldiers seemed too strange to be true. But intelligence reports confirmed that Castle Itter was indeed a high-value target, and the political importance of the prisoners made rescue a priority. The problem was logistics. Lee had only a handful of men, one operational Sherman tank nicknamed Besotten Jenny, and limited ammunition. A conventional assault on a fortified castle would require significant forces which weren't available. The solution came from an unexpected source, Major Gangl himself. On May 4th, Gangl approached American positions under a white flag and proposed something unprecedented: joint German-American operations to defend the castle against the SS. This proposal violated every military protocol and political assumption of the war, but the unique circumstances made it the only viable option. This is where the Battle of Castle Itter becomes not just militarily fascinating, but morally complex. How do you transform enemies into allies overnight? The answer reveals the pragmatic realities that often override ideology in desperate situations. Captain Lee made the decision to accept Gangl's proposal, but with strict conditions. German forces would fight under American command, follow American orders, and surrender all weapons to U.S. forces after the operation. Any betrayal would result in immediate execution of all German participants. The force that assembled for the defense of Castle Itter was unlike anything seen in World War II. Lee's tank crew operated the Sherman Besotten Jenny, while a small squad of American paratroopers provided infantry support. Alongside them fought about 20 German Wehrmacht soldiers under Major Gangl's command, armed with German weapons but following American tactical orders. Most remarkably, several of the French prisoners insisted on participating in their own defense. These weren't trained soldiers, they were politicians and intellectuals, but they understood that their survival depended on the success of this unlikely alliance. The attacking force was approximately 150-200 Waffen SS troops from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, commanded by officers who had been ordered to eliminate the prisoners and anyone protecting them. These weren't regular Wehrmacht soldiers looking for ways to surrender, they were fanatical SS troops who viewed the German defenders as traitors deserving execution. The battle began at dawn on May 5, 1945, with SS forces attacking the castle from multiple directions. The defenders had fortified the medieval walls and established firing positions that maximized their limited manpower. Besotten Jenny was positioned to provide fire support, while American and German infantry coordinated their defensive tactics. What followed was 4 hours of intense combat that tested every assumption about warfare, loyalty, and survival. American paratroopers directed German machine gun crews, while Major Gangel coordinated with Captain Lee on tactical decisions. French prisoners served as spotters and runners, providing intelligence about SS movements. The most dramatic moment came when SS forces managed to breach the outer defenses and were advancing toward the main castle building. Major Gangel, while coordinating the defense with American officers, was killed by an SS sniper. His death symbolized the complete transformation of the war's final days, where a German officer died fighting alongside Americans against his own countrymen. The battle's turning point came when additional American forces arrived as reinforcements. The 142nd Infantry Regiment had been alerted to the situation and dispatched a relief column that arrived just as the defenders' ammunition was running critically low. The sight of approaching American armor caused the remaining SS forces to withdraw, ending one of the most unusual battles in military history. Let's examine why this battle became possible and what it reveals about the nature of warfare, loyalty, and survival in extreme circumstances. Theory 1. Practical military necessity. By May 1945, traditional military and political structures had completely collapsed in much of Germany and Austria. Individual commanders were making survival decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than ideological loyalty. Major Gangel's decision to ally with Americans was a rational response to an impossible situation where following SS orders meant certain death. The prisoners at Castle Itter represented valuable assets that both American and German officers recognized could be useful in post-war negotiations. Protecting them served everyone's interests, regardless of previous political allegiances. Theory 2. Moral awakening and war crimes consciousness. As the war ended and the full scope of Nazi atrocities became apparent, some German officers like Major Gangel sought redemption by protecting victims rather than continuing to follow criminal orders. The Battle of Castle Itter offered an opportunity to fight on the right side of history. Contemporary accounts suggest that Gangel had become increasingly disturbed by SS brutality and saw the defense of Castle Itter as a chance to prove that not all German soldiers were war criminals. Theory 3. Strategic calculation for post-war survival. German officers who cooperated with Allied forces in the war's final days improved their chances of survival and lenient treatment in post-war proceedings. Gangel's alliance with American forces could be seen as an insurance policy against war crimes prosecution. Similarly, American officers recognized that German cooperation could save American lives and achieve military objectives with minimal resources. The evidence supporting these theories comes from multiple sources. Post-battle interviews with participants reveal complex motivations that combined practical necessity with genuine moral considerations. Captain Lee's after-action reports describe Gangel as a professional soldier who was genuinely committed to protecting the prisoners. French survivors of Castle Itter, including future politicians who would shape post-war Europe, wrote extensively about the battle and consistently praised both American and German defenders. Their testimonies provide crucial perspectives on how this unusual alliance functioned in practice. German military archives captured by Allied forces contain documentation showing the breakdown of command structures that made individual initiatives like Gangel's possible. These records reveal how rapidly traditional military hierarchy collapsed in the war's final weeks. However, some historians argue that the Battle of Castle Itter has been romanticized and that the practical realities were less dramatic than later accounts suggest. They point out that by May 5th, effective German resistance had largely ended, and most Wehrmacht units were actively seeking ways to surrender to Western allies rather than face Soviet capture. Critics also note that the German participants in the battle were motivated primarily by self-preservation rather than moral awakening, and that characterizing this as a genuine alliance overstates the ideological transformation involved. The legacy of the Battle of Castle Itter extends far beyond its immediate military significance. This engagement has become a symbol of how quickly political and military alliances can shift when faced with immediate threats to survival. For the participants, the battle had profound personal consequences. The American soldiers involved became part of one of the most unique combat actions in military history. The German soldiers who survived were treated as prisoners of war, but received relatively lenient treatment due to their cooperation in defending the prisoners. Most importantly, the French prisoners who were rescued went on to play crucial roles in post-war European politics. Several became government ministers, and their survival may have influenced the reconstruction of democratic institutions in France. The battle also demonstrated how individual moral choices can transcend political ideologies in extreme circumstances. Major Gangel's decision to fight alongside Americans against fellow Germans showed that personal conscience could override institutional loyalty, even in the most disciplined military organizations. For military historians, Castle Itter represents a unique case study in alliance formation, coalition warfare, and the breakdown of traditional military hierarchies. The successful cooperation between former enemies provides insights into how military units can rapidly adapt to changing political circumstances. The question that emerges from studying this battle is profound. What does it take to transform enemies into allies? And what does the Battle of Castle Itter tell us about the nature of loyalty, survival, and moral choice in extreme circumstances? Do you think Major Gangel and the German soldiers were motivated primarily by moral awakening or practical survival considerations? And what does this battle reveal about how quickly political alliances can change when faced with immediate threats? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This brings us to the end of today's exploration of the strangest battle of World War II. The Battle of Castle Itter demonstrates how extraordinary circumstances can create impossible alliances and how individual moral choices can transcend political ideologies. Understanding these unique historical moments helps us recognize the complexity of human behavior in extreme situations. If you found this incredible story fascinating, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the most unusual and forgotten moments of history. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the events that challenge everything we think we know about the past. Until next time, keep exploring the amazing complexity of human history.